My name is Rich Madalino. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Montgomery County government. And today I will be your moderator for the media briefing. Thrilled to have you all on. We're going to be talking about a variety of issues. But as always, we will start by some opening comments from the County Executive, Mark Elrich.
Thank you all for being here. And I will start. I'm going to start this week by thanking so many people in our county who took the time to advocate both for and against my proposed budgets. Your participation helps make our budget and our government stronger. And I want to thank the council and their staff for working diligently to understand my proposed budgets. I know we share a desire to have a great community with outstanding public services. That's why they embraced more than 98% of what I proposed in the operating budget. In the end, this budget allows us to meet most of the needs in our community, whether it's good schools, good transit, or safe neighborhoods, and a growing opportunity. After 2 months of reviewing the budget, they concurred with my original decisions on what we needed to fund. It was interesting listening to the language about, these are services that we have to have. And, I'd reached that conclusion when I sent them the budget. In the first place, I guess it's natural to hope that you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't need to be there. We had done everything we could to get the things that didn't need to be there not there when we sent that budget over. So I'm glad we're not fighting over what we need to do mostly. I'm also pleased the council understood and eventually embraced my call for additional revenues to meet the growing needs of our community, especially of our public schools. While they took a path on revenues that was different than what I proposed, their actions raised $140 million in new taxes for the fiscal year. Unfortunately, the council tax increase falls solely on the backs of our homeowners. And by eliminating the $692 property tax credit, known in our county lingo as the income tax offset credit, or ITOC, they are raising taxes on more than 201,000 households in our county by a flat $692. I'd proposed a broad-based property tax increase of 6.3 cents, which would have generated more revenue, but would have also impacted all properties based solely on their taxable values. Under the council plan, 88% of homeowners will pay more than under my proposal. And under the council plan, all commercial properties, from the smallest shopping center in Damascus to the newest trophy office building in Bethesda, avoids any new taxes. In other words, it's entirely on the backs of our residents. And I have a problem with this. I've continued to point out to the council and to our residents that alone in the DC area, Montgomery County has the lowest commercial taxes of anybody in the DC area. And in Virginia, they actually have differential taxes, and in DC, where commercial property gets taxed at higher rates than residential property. That gives them so much more flexibility in how they fund their budgets without having to rely solely on residents. And that's something the county could have adopted. It's something we need to adopt. And the council has resolutely opposed legislation in the state that would have assisted us, would have given us the power to do this for several years now. And it's time to take our heads out of the sand and look at what they're doing in Virginia, because if you like where they went, you need to look at how they got there. And this is a big way in how they got there. They never could have raised the revenue they needed on residents. And the differential taxes on commercial property made what they've done possible. It's time for us to go in the same direction. For months, the county council repeatedly criticized my budget proposal, saying they were worried about a structural deficit. And they said we needed to avoid creating future problems. Then they passed a budget that creates, using their framework, a much bigger long-term problem. The council's income tax restructuring plan reduces long-term revenues by tens of millions of dollars because the change in income tax rates they approved takes effect in January, halfway through the fiscal year. Because of that, there'll be $65 million less in FY27 than under my recommended budget. However, that revenue reduction balloons to about $158 million in FY28. That's the budget we'll be doing starting in December this year. When the next executive starts putting it together for a vote next April. And that budget's going to have $158 million fewer dollars from these tax rates than they otherwise would have had. I don't necessarily call that a structural deficit, but it's a deficit caused by the rates that you choose to set on taxes. And this one has created a crater, which is going to be a challenge to climb out of next year. So while some people may hear short-term tax relief, I see a self-imposed unnecessary crater for future recurring revenues. And when recurring revenues disappear, we have to begin making permanent service cuts. This will affect schools, it will affect public safety, and it's going to affect transportation and housing and health and human services. The largest cuts in the budget were to funding our public schools. The council cut about 20% from my recommended MCPS budget. While this is disappointing for many parents, students, and educators who advocated for full funding, it could have been worse. I appreciated that several council members held firm against calls for punitive cuts to MCPS and forced the council to ultimately restore additional funding before the straw vote. And I got to say, the punitive attitude, this notion that schools have struggled because of student performance, and therefore they should be punished with less revenue, is mind-boggling to me as a former teacher and someone who's seen the change in the student body over the years. I taught starting in about 1987, going forward to 2006, and that change has only continued. The challenge of teaching now is greater than it was when I was teaching. The number of people with disabilities is far greater. The number of second language students who don't have literacy in the first language, the English. All these things are challenges that did not exist back in the good old days when some of the council members went to school. And that makes dealing with learning more challenging, and handicapping the school system with fewer funds to deal with that problem, I think is important. And blaming the school systems for underlying social problems is, I think, wrong. You could just as easily blame it on the fact that we've never incorporated early childhood education as a requirement, which is something we all know would make a difference, but have not been able to figure out how we fund at scale. Finding the final funding level in the budget is going to achieve a long-term goal of mine, though, which is getting per pupil spending back to the pre-Great Recession levels of funding. As you can see on this chart on the screen, you can see how far below we fell from what we were spending in 2010, and to now be back up to that level is at least a relief. It's the same dollars, probably should be more dollars given the issues they have, but it's an accomplishment to get us back to where we were at least. But I want to be clear that MCPS is still receiving $35 million less than what the Board of Education and Superintendent said the schools and our children need. That means reductions now have to be made to what the schools assumed they would have available next year, including reductions to key support staff. Tomorrow evening, Dr. Taylor and the Board of Education will decide on how to restructure their budget at this new lower funding level. I remind everybody that the superintendent's message to the council last week was every $10 million cut in funding would have been a loss of 100 jobs. And so this would extrapolate to about 350 jobs. We'll see where that winds up, but I'm very concerned that if it is those many jobs, we have a problem. I also want residents to understand that the council's budget did include additional cuts to the county government. We'll also put the full items that are on that list of the reduced into the chat, and we're also going to make it available to you by email. I don't want to have to go through every single one of them, but I'm going to highlight a couple that I thought were important. The first is we cut funding for the annual maintenance of something called the Community Connect portal. When I came into the executive branch and I started asking about how residents accessed all our stuff, I found that every department was disconnected from every other department. That if you wanted housing aid, you could go to the housing department and get interviewed, and they take your information and they tell you what you're eligible for. If you're eligible for something else, you had to get on a bus and go to the health department, for example, or go to another county department that had funding that you could access without knowing what that funding was. And the whole point of the Community Connect portal was to give a single point of entry when it was complete, and it would have been complete probably in another year of work. Anybody entering any place in the county would know not only what's available to them, say if they enter through HHS, but what's available to them through the housing department and what's available to them through our healthcare providers. The people who access our clinics and who often have no other services, and this is a largely, immigrant population, would have had access to the list of county programs when they entered a clinic. It would have given us an integrated system that any social worker helping a person in any department could help get them a full range of what's available instead of sending them all over the county. And it's a shame. And there are 3,000 residents right now who are currently using the portal, and they're going to lose access, which means they're going to have to return to paper management. And that's not an optimal solution. Full implementation of this portal was to once and for all open all our programs so that whenever you enter the system, you'd be able to get access to it. I'm hoping we can find ways to forestall that. If it shuts down on June 30th, which is the current plan, that's going to leave a bunch of people high and dry. Some of the other not fun cuts, 142,000 cuts from our increased proposal to meet food costs at senior nutrition programs. We have these programs across the county. The cost of food has gone up. The number of people needing food has gone up. And our increase was meant to meet what the providers told us they were going to need in the coming year, and they're not going to get it. They also get a cut in $196,000 for dental rate increases to pay for the dentists who serve our population, and a $50,000 cut to dental equipment that supplies MCPS connected child services. On public safety, and these are, I think, are really concerning, 182,000 out of a dedicated K-9 unit for the contraband detection at our security and correction rehabilitation. As in every jail in the country, contraband gets into the jail, and the dog would have helped to detect that before it becomes a problem. That funding, dedicated funding, was cut. We wanted to replace obsolete tasers in the corrections and rehabilitation department. That wasn't funded. We had a program to aid in vehicle recovery software, and that money, 180,000 was cut. And we had $150,000 for more fixed automatic license plate readers. That was cut. Why is that important? Because, and you can ask the police now, these license plate readers are identifying people with stolen cars entering the county, or people who are here and manage to hide their car. When they get a hit on their license plate reader, our police officers are alerted. We have the ability, and we are taking people off the streets who are driving stolen cars. And often they use a stolen car to go to another jurisdiction to commit a crime because that vehicle can't be traced back to them. These are the kind of things that make our community safer, and I think we're a worthwhile investment, and that's not the kind of thing I would have cut. And they cut $207,000 for enhanced security guard services at 5 of our library branches. This is not a secret. We know that for a number of reasons, we're seeing security problems in multiple library branches. We have, an ongoing problem with homelessness in some of these branches. And having enhanced security guards make these library branches safer for the patrons, for the people who are having trouble coping, and for the library staff. And to me, this is not the kind of cut that we should have been making. The council also reduced the Green Bank, another $2 million below my recommended budget. They cut, now this, in the context of a council that talks about the need to grow jobs, $2 million cut that eliminated third-party support in our business incubators to help entrepreneurs launch, hire, and scale. $577,000, a 30% cut in funding for small business training and one-on-one counseling to help small businesses start and grow. $85,000 cut to connect job seekers with employers at the Up-County American Job Center. That was not funded in the period of economic uncertainty and workforce disruption. And $274,000 cut for apprenticeship investments tied to electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and skilled trade workforce development. All of these create jobs for people and opportunities for people. In transit, almost $1 million was cut from Flex Transit services that provided services to Poolsville and Damask, which are currently underserved with transit. Cut out $245,000 to extend the flash service to Burtonsville, which is a critical point where a lot of people live and people come down from Howard County. $250,000 for civilian parking enforcement, not funded. That's just some of the highlights from those departments. A few other things, $1.5 million in nonprofit resiliency grants weren't funded. when many of our nonprofits are facing instability tied to federal funding cuts. And these aren't abstract things. These are services people use. These are programs people rely on. The council repeatedly says that this is a difficult year. I agree. But by refusing to even discuss my revenue proposal, they made it harder for themselves and ultimately for our residents during a critical time who are going to lose key services and supports at the very moment of economic uncertainty demands. And some of those residents who are going to be benefiting from the tax cut that the council proposed are also going to be losing services on the other side of that tax cut. So this does not land well for a lot of people. I expect them to finalize the budget tomorrow. Under the charter, I have authority to line item veto things. I will be looking at that. I don't have authority to veto the new income tax structure. If I could, I would, because it was enacted by a separate council resolution. And I can't veto resolutions. My focus is on making sure residents clearly understand the long-term implications of these decisions and they prepare for what we have to deal with next. I also want to reiterate something I said before. This budget process continued with progress made last year to add more transparency. I appreciate the public deliberations and discussions that did occur, but I also think Councilmember Don Lukey raised legitimate concerns last week regarding last-minute changes and behind the closed door negotiations that occurred late in the process. Council members are not supposed to be getting together to have those closed door conversations. I said before, and I'll say it again, whatever people wanted to cut, they should have raised their hands and said, I want to cut this. Everybody should have been able to see who supported the budget and who supported individual items and who wanted to cut them. Nobody should have been able to go through all these committee meetings, which apparently where everything we proposed was unanimously approved in virtually every committee meeting. Nobody should be able to do that and then behind closed doors vote not to fund something so that they can go out in public after all this is over and say, I voted for the money in your budget, but I actually didn't vote for the money in your budget. So I appreciate Councilmember Mink is the only one willing to advocate for an increase in property tax. And I appreciate Councilmember Jawanda, who at least put forward a list of cuts, trying to preserve funding for schools and recognizing that we weren't going to be getting a tax increase. Will proposed a number of cuts. I would have cut different things. I probably wouldn't have cut what he cut, but at least there was an effort to figure out another way to wrangle this budget rather than create a bigger hole for ourselves. Regardless of where we stood on the budget, transparency matters and residents deserve to understand how decisions are made. And it shouldn't depend on who's council president or who's serving on the council at a given moment. This council and future councils should continue working toward a budget process that consistently upholds transparency and public trust.
Great. We're going to stop there to take questions about the budget before we move on to a few other subjects. So, as always, Chaley is first up with her hand to ask some questions.
Hello. So my question is about the possibility of a line item veto. I'm just wondering, first of all, like how that would work process-wise. What would happen if the county executive were to veto one or more line items in the budget, what the council would have to do at that point, and then what specifically you might be considering a line item veto for.
I haven't made any decisions. I'm just going to look at that and see what's there that might be worth taking off. The process would be normal with any veto. The council can override my veto, but they would have to do that. And so you got to decide if there are enough votes for something. Is it worth vetoing it just to do that? I do that sometimes on principle. I didn't know if I'll do it on line items.
So from a process standpoint, they will present all of the things they pass tomorrow to us formally on Tuesday. The county executive has 10 days to make a decision, and then they have to make a decision on accepting or overriding any vetoes before June 30th, because the fiscal year starts July 1st. So that's the process. And unfortunately, the county executive can't veto a zero. Right. So if they cut something, he can't say, no, I reject that. So
damn. I was so hoping I could veto zeros.
Talia?
Yes, thank you so much for taking my question. I think I would just like to know what is your message to the Hispanic Latino community in regards to the situations with the budget in the schools. I was talking to some of the staff members and they were pretty much worried because some of the programs that will be most impacted, according to them, would be those that directly help the Hispanic Latino community.
Look, I'm going to assume that if the school system has to make cuts, they will try to do it and do the minimal amount of damage. But when you're talking about that much money and those many people, it's going to be hard. It's not like the school people's got a bunch of people, lying around who don't do anything useful. If that were the case, none of us would have any heartburn about making these cuts. And I will say the superintendent's done some thinning of the school system since he's been superintendent. So I think there's even less of that than there was before. I'm hoping that, they all sit down, him and the board, and decide where can you cut and that causes the least damage. When I had to deal with cuts, because I made cuts in my budget, I looked at what can I cut that causes the least damage. I'm going to hope and assume that that's what their intention is. They are, after all, educators. They don't get any satisfaction out of making it harder for a child to learn. But at some point, they may not have any choice about some things. So we'll see what happens.
Talia, we would be happy to also have, if you need something in Spanish right now, Luisa Cardona, one of the assistant chief administrative officers, is on.
Yes, please.
La misma pregunta.
Sí, por favor, muchas gracias.
El ejecutivo Mark Albert sabe que las decisiones que le esperan a los colegios van a ser muy difíciles, pero la expectativa y en nuestras conversaciones y las conversaciones con el ejecutivo y los colegios es que cuando están mirando a qué cortar, que sea el menos impacto para nuestras familias y los que están enseñando en las clases, pero basado en lo que hemos visto en los colegios, sí sabemos que van a ser muchos de las personas que ayudan a profesoras, que ayudan a nuestras familias, en particular a las familias hispanas, pero desafortunadamente esos son lo que estamos viendo basado en el presupuesto que pasó este condado.
Y un follow-up rapidito, ¿qué otro tipo de programa o servicio o recurso también estará afectando a la comunidad inmigrante, a la comunidad latina, bajo la aprobación de este nuevo presupuesto?
Hay varios sectores, ¿cierto? El Ejecutivo está sacando una lista. Todos los programas que apoya el condado están disponibles a cualquier persona sin importar su estatus migratorio. Entonces, en verdad, todos los programas que no podemos expandir por lo que pasó el Consejo, van a impactar a todas nuestras familias inmigrantes.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. Rich Daniel. You're on mute.
Thank you, everybody. Mark, good afternoon. Now, if you could reiterate, there were several things, I believe 4 areas with the incubator, job center, skills training in regard to small business and entrepreneurship. Could you just reiterate those 4 areas, and if the line item consideration that we have now heard about would apply to any of those 4 areas and the amounts that you mentioned?
Well, God, no. I mean, I'm not. Those are cuts they made. So
Yeah.
if I could veto their cuts, I would do that. I can't veto the cuts. It was $2 million to third-party support for our business incubators.
Yep.
So we've got small businesses in these incubators. We're trying to grow them. It leaves us with one staff member to support 80 companies. That is going to be challenging. It is no funding for programming. We were looking to sign a contract and expand our incubator programs like other jurisdictions have done that people would like to point to, and we're not going to be able to do that. They did a 30% reduction, almost 600,000 from small business training, one-on-one counseling to help small businesses, 85,000 to connect job seekers with employers at the Up County Job Center, and 274,000 for apprenticeship investments tied to electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and the skilled trades. All good jobs, all things that make a difference.
Thank you for your advocacy in those areas. They're critically important, as all the other things you mentioned. And while there may not be a line item ahead for that, I hope there's other discussions that can produce better results.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any more questions about the budget, although if you know Mark Elrich, he's willing to talk about the budget anytime, anywhere. So why don't we move on to the next topic?
All right, next topic is Maryland's mail-in ballot error. That could not have come at a worse time. We're now aware of the issue involving mail-in ballots being sent incorrectly to voters across Maryland. Montgomery County voters, like all voters across the state who requested a mail-in ballot, will be receiving an informational postcard. And this is a picture of what that looks like from the state soon, with details about what is being done immediately to remedy the error. Replacement ballots are being mailed out to all voters who requested a mail-in ballot. So if you requested a mail-in ballot, you will be getting a replacement ballot. Throw away the first one and use the second one. State Board of Elections noted that the process is essentially the same as voting any mail-in ballot. However, the voters should return the replacement ballot in the envelope that is marked replacement envelope. The original ballot received by voters should be destroyed. This is not a county-created nor managed issue, and the Maryland State Board of Elections is leading the response. We want to make sure Montgomery County residents understand what happened and know how to avoid the problems with their ballots. If residents have questions, they should contact the Montgomery County Board of Elections directly or visit the State Board's website for their updated guidance. And we're going to put the link to this information in our chat. That's the mail-in ballot replacement information. What I do want to address is the political circus that immediately followed the mistake. President Trump posted online this weekend claiming Maryland had 500,000 fake mail-in ballots revealed. No, actually had found the error is what they did, and used it again to undermine confidence in elections. That's reckless. And frankly, hearing lectures about election integrity from Donald Trump, who doesn't even know the meaning of the word integrity, is infuriating. This is the same president who spent years spreading lies about elections, inciting an insurrection on January 6th to stop the counting of electors, to threaten the safety of MMCTV police officers and many of our residents, including pushing political efforts around the country that makes it harder for many Americans, particularly minority communities, to exercise their right to vote. There's a difference between acknowledging an administrative or vendor mistake and intentionally trying to convince people that democracy itself can't be trusted, particularly by a man who's trying to destroy democracy. Maryland identified the issue. Election officials publicly disclosed the case. Corrective guidance was issued, and this is what a functioning election administration looks like. Residents should stay informed, follow the instructions provided by election officials, and continue participating in the democratic process, despite the efforts of the president and Republicans to continue to suppress voter turnout and to prevent a free and fair election. News on the homeless this week. The point-in-time count came out and there was a briefing a few weeks ago at COG, and we shared with you Montgomery County saw a decrease in the number of people experiencing homelessness. Last week, we received the regional report from the Council of Governments, and you can see from this chart, we were an outlier in the region with a 26% reduction, the only jurisdiction in the region with a double-digit reduction. The progress did not happen by accident. It reflects years of investment in housing, emergency shelter services, outreach workers, mental health services, rental assistance, nonprofit partnerships, and coordinated support systems designed to move people from crisis into stability. I want to thank the County Council for maintaining several critical housing and shelter investments during the budget process, including $2 million for short-term housing and resolution program for families, and another $2 million for overflow emergency shelter support for families to help reduce motel room usage. Those are important investments because homelessness is not solved through slogans. These are not people who, if they could just go out and get a job if they wanted to and solve all their financial problems, let alone mental health problems that so many people struggle with. It's solved through sustained funding, coordination with housing availability, and it's solved with support services. And these are things we do in the county. That's why I remain deeply concerned about what could happen if there are major reductions in housing, healthcare, nutrition, behavioral health, or homelessness prevention funding at the federal or state level. And Trump is threatening a number of those programs. The numbers reflected in the point-in-time count are people, not statistics. These are veterans, seniors, young people, families with children, residents dealing with mental illness, residents escaping domestic violence, and people who simply fell behind financially in one of the most expensive regions in the country. So while I'm encouraged by the progress reflected in the year's number, I also view it as a reminder that pulling back investments now would move us in the wrong direction. The results show that these programs matter. Housing support matters and shelter support matters. Prevention matters. Prevention probably matters more than anything. And outreach matters. And if we want these numbers to continue improving, we have to remain committed to the work. And I continue to believe that this is important. I've said this earlier, and I came back from Los Angeles earlier this year and just there for a few days, and seeing what happens when you wind up with large numbers of unsheltered people all over the city, struggling to get by and sleeping in the shadows of an overpass, or in the middle of a street or a sidewalk. It's important that we avoid that. And that only happens when you have the resources to provide as much support services as you can. In the meantime, we're experiencing dangerous heat this week with temperatures in the mid-90s. Thankfully, this is expected to break today, and tomorrow will be more seasonable, but the extremely hot weather is a reminder that 90-degree weather is going to be a constant threat over the next 3 months. The heat waves are becoming more severe in Maryland because of climate change, and they're starting earlier in the season. I can't remember a spring like this spring. It's pretty remarkable. Globally, heat records are now being broken far more than cold records. In some places, heat records outpace cold records by ratios as high as 10-1. Scientists have been clear that this trend is tied to human-caused climate change, and the last decade has been the hottest 10-year period in roughly 175 years of recorded global temperatures. Every single year since 2015 has ranked among the warmest years ever recorded. People underestimate the impact of heat on our bodies, but the fact is the people who work in extreme heat conditions can get injured or die from the heat. Heat waves kill more people on average than any other weather event, and heat-related deaths are on the rise in the U.S. Last year, 34 people in Maryland lost their lives due to extreme heat, including 4 people in Montgomery County. That's something that just shouldn't happen. People experience the heat standing at a bus stop or working outdoors. When utility bills rise and storms intensify and prolonged heat creates dangerous health conditions. This is a very interesting chart we've created to help educate people. It's bilingual, be cool and save lives. Protégete, Luisa, del calor salva vidas. We are trying to get this alert out to as many people as possible. I want to thank the Department of Environmental Protection, Climate Justice Co-Creation Initiative for its work to save lives, county employees, public health teams, emergency management personnel, transportation workers, recreation staff, libraries, and outreach workers all contributed to the educational material that's now being shared through the county's new Be Cool, Save Lives campaign. Be on the lookout for it in English and Spanish to keep your family and friends safe from extreme heat. The campaign is partnering with Maryland's Occupational Safety and Health, which is responsible for enforcing the heat stress standards. This campaign is about making sure residents understand the warning signs of heat illness and can spot the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. We want to arm the community with the ability to take action if a coworker is in trouble and know how to protect themselves, their families, neighbors, and pets. A few summers ago, the city of Baltimore experienced a terrible tragedy when a sanitation worker died from heat stroke while on the job. Nobody should lose their life simply by going to work in extreme heat. Every worker deserves water, shade, rest, and the ability to protect themselves when conditions become dangerous. Employers are required to provide workers exposed to heat conditions with 32 ounces per hour. That's 4 cups of water per hour. I want county employees and really every employer and employee in Montgomery County to take these conditions seriously. Know the warning signs. If someone's experiencing heat exhaustion symptoms like dizziness, nausea, muscle cramps, heavy sweating, or weakness, get them to a cool or shaded area immediately, give them water, and help cool down their bodies. If someone is showing signs of heat stroke, confusion, slurred speech, unconsciousness, hot skin, or body temperature above 103 degrees, call 911 immediately. Heat stroke is a medical emergency, and we want everyone to check on older neighbors and vulnerable residents. Stay hydrated, limit strenuous outdoor activity during peak heat hours whenever possible. Hot weather is dangerous, but preparation and awareness will save lives.
Mark, we're joined by Adriana Hochberg, one of the team members here in the county executive's office, to talk a little bit more about this campaign.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I just wanted to add that we invite residents and businesses to participate in one of our upcoming webinars about extreme heat safety. They are taking place on June 5th and June 11th in English and in Spanish. And to register and to learn more about extreme heat safety, we invite you to visit montgomerykountymd.gov/be cool.
Thank you, Adriana.
And finally, congratulations to the class of 2026. Graduation season is one of the best times of year. Students, parents, teachers, and families have worked incredibly hard to reach this moment, and I'm especially looking forward to delivering the commencement address at my alma mater, Albert Einstein High School, in a couple of weeks. That was 49 years ago for me. I also want to thank Montgomery College for expanding the 2 commencement ceremonies this year to more families and friends so they can participate in celebrating our graduates. That was a thoughtful decision. I want to congratulate my former Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, Sonia Mora, on being recognized by Montgomery College by their commitments for her decades of service to this county and to our residents. I also want to remind everyone celebrating this season to do it responsibly. Don't drink and drive. Don't use cannabis and drive. Don't drive distracted. I encourage everyone who can take one of our no-cost ride-on buses to your destination. These should be a joyful milestone for families and students. Nobody wants a graduation celebration interrupted by tragedy. So I'm going to turn it over to my HHS teams for their updates, and then we'll be back for questions.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. I'll start with a reminder that the month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. The county has great person-centered care access points, either through our 988 number, which offers support for emotional distress or mental health crises via text, a phone call, or chat. The other method is via our crises helpline, 240-777-4000. If you need to speak to someone directly or have mental health face-to-face intervention, or if you need to have our mobile crisis outreach team come and support anyone who may be in need or who is in distress, please reach out to one of our numbers, our 988. If you want to text or correspond with someone, if you want to talk to someone and have that one-on-one communication or face-to-face intervention, please dial 240-777-4000. These are evidence-based resources and tools, and they are person-centered that will help you. I'll turn it over to Sean O'Donnell now for our public health update.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Monday evening, we met with the county representatives from Health and Human Services, Department of Environmental Protection, met up with colleagues at the Maryland Department of the Environment, as well as with DC Water at a town hall held in Glen Echo. And the purpose of this was to give updates on rehabilitation efforts that were going on with the land and the water around the Potomac Interceptor spill. One of the outcomes of the recent work is, as we've been continuing to monitor the water column data. This testing has shown us along the Montgomery County area that the level of bacteria in the water has returned back to levels that are consistent with what we had seen historically before the leak from the Potomac Interceptor. As a result, we have updated our public health advisory, removing the advisory to avoid contact with the water along this area. That doesn't mean that that the Potomac River is safe to drink out of, or safe to ingest the water. It's a natural body of water, and will have bacteria that will vary from depending on environmental conditions. Particularly after heavy rainfalls, those bacteria levels will jump to more dangerous levels. And of course, there are individuals that can be at greater risk for any bacteria. And the two main routes that people can become sick if they come in contact with bacteria is either through an open wound when they're in the water, or through ingesting water. But largely, the testing results have shown that those water levels have safe recreating levels of bacteria in them. So we've lifted that part of the advisory. The other part of updates that we were able to share with our local residents in that area was that some level of sediment testing has begun, and results have come in. The initial collections have been done by MDE, and in partnership with the University of Maryland. They've looked at those results. Now, one thing that we're aware of is that this testing of sediment is not as common a protocol as it is with water testing. And so while they're looking at that early data, we're still developing a sense of if there's patterns, if there's changes in what's happening. Most of the specimens that came back have shown low levels of bacteria in that sediment, with the exception of 2 samples that were taken near Minnie's Island. And so we've had discussions with the folks who manage the island. They have not been open to the public since the spill. And right now, our advisory continues to warn people to try to avoid the sediment that is right around that area, leading from where the leak happened around Lock 11 down to Minnie's Island. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that we're banning people from going in this area, but we are sharing that advisory to let people know that there may be higher bacteria levels in the sediment. We're hoping that there'll be additional testing that occurs that will give us a better idea of exactly where that bacteria may be and if those levels are changing. But right now, we're advising people, particularly people with children or with pets, to try to avoid that area, going in the sediment of that area. And if they happen to come in contact with the sediment, we're recommending disinfection precautions, washing hands or other things that come in contact, or disinfecting any clothes that may come in contact. Again, just to limit the possibility that there might be bacteria transmitted. So I just wanted to give that update. We've updated our county webpage with a amended advisory speaking to these points. Again, right after a rainfall, we do expect bacteria levels in the water to increase, and we ask people to exercise caution for 24 to 72 hours after that rainfall. We have not seen a spike in illnesses, and we'd like to keep it that way. So those are the updates we have from public health, but happy to turn it over to Dr. Stoddard before taking any questions.
Thanks, Sean. Just wanted to recognize that this is National EMS Week across the country, and I want to thank the volunteer and career staff at our fire rescue services. They respond to about 120,000 EMS calls per year and provide excellent service. So much so that actually the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Service Systems, MIMS, the state agency that does EMS, is recognizing Montgomery County as the EMS System of the Year this year for their innovations in whole blood and other initiatives that have really enhanced safety across Montgomery County. We'll be welcoming the Chief Smedley, who's out right now this week, I think. We'll be recognizing him in a future media briefing to talk more about this. But I did want to call out that this is EMS week, and we want to thank our first responders who provide such wonderful service in Montgomery County.
It's a great time to remind people that before his 8 years as county executive, Mark Elrich spent 12 years on the county council, many of those years as chair of the Public Safety Committee. So he has a long-time commitment to public safety, to our fire department, police department, corrections, our entire public safety operation. So a lot of what has been accomplished has been through the hard work and devoted efforts of Mark Elrich as county executive and county council member. And that shouldn't be forgotten either. So before I get to questions, it's important to, for some of the reporters on, if you want to look at the river, you could always do a story about the cursed status of the Potomac River. Just look up the curse of the Three Sisters, and you'll know why you should stay away from that part of the Potomac River.
Okay,
All right.
Now we got to know this, Rich.
No. You got to look it up. You got to look it up. That's what that's what the Google machine is for. So, but I want to give. We'll see if who Chaley, Jenny, who runs to do that story first as an interesting weekend piece. All right. Any questions on a serious note for County Executive Elrich? Dr. Bridgers, Dr. Stoddard, Dr. O'Donnell. We'll give him again. It was nice to see Sean, a devoted Buffalo Sabres fan, still standing even after 7th game overtime heartbreak. Nope. No questions. All righty. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining today's media briefing, and have a wonderful Memorial Day.